Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Newburyport Literary Festival. My name is Leslie Hendrickson. I'm on the steering committee of the festival. This is our second day. We had a great day yesterday. We hope you were able to see a few of the events. If not, we're excited to have you here today, and we have another great lineup. This is our second year online and our 16th edition. Of course, we hope to be back in person next year, but this format has allowed us to bring a lot of new and different authors to the festival. And in fact, it's our biggest festival ever with over 100 participants. Just a few housekeeping things before we get started. You probably know this, but we're using the webinar format. That means you'll hear and see the panelists, but we will not be able to see you. In addition, you can use the chat box at the bottom of the Zoom screen. Please feel free to let everyone know where you're from, if you're new to the festival, or if you're an old friend. But if you have questions, please put the questions in the Q&A tab. That allows us to keep them organized and read them more clearly. You might have heard yesterday was Independent Bookstore Day, and of course we want to support our independent bookstore partners. Our links to the partners, the Bookshop of Beverly Farms and Jabberwocky Bookshop in Newburyport, will be in the chat, and they have books from all the authors in the festival. We encourage you to support them or your own local independent bookshop. I am going to do quick bios of our two guests today, and there is more information about them on our website. Elena Dylan is the author of Mercy House, a Library Journal Best Book of 2020, which has been optioned as a Paramount Plus television series with Amy Schumer, the happiest girl in the world, called an excellent psychological drama by Publishers Weekly, and a forthcoming memoir about pregnancy and early motherhood, My Body is a Big Fat Temple. Joanne Serling's debut novel, Good Neighbors, was published by 12 Grand Central Publishing in February 2018. A former magazine editor, she is a graduate of Cornell University and studied and taught fiction at the Writers' Studio in New York City. She lives in New Jersey with her husband and children and is at work on her second book. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Joanne. Thank you both so much for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for those nice introductions. I don't know if everyone out there has seen this book, but it is so gripping that once you start, you really can't stop. So that's a warning and an encouragement to go out and get it. And I just want to congratulate Elena. Am I saying that right? Elena,
yeah, that's right. Thank you.
And really creating such a memorable portrait of a competitive gymnast and her family and the world of gymnastics, which I think is often invisible to the people who just enjoy the sport. And I know you did so much research, and we're going to talk about that in a few minutes. But the first question I had as I read this was, what drew you, the author, to this material? Because obviously, Larry Nassar was in the news, the doctor who abused the girls, but there's a real depth of connection. So I was curious whether or not you were an elite athlete or you loved gymnastics. You know, what drew you to the material?
So I was just one of those people that tuned in every 4 years and enjoyed the sport and the spectacle on the Olympics. I certainly was never a gymnast, and definitely not elite. But yeah, I started writing the book during the Larry Nassar scandal. I had been writing Mercy House at the time. I was finishing a rewrite on Mercy House, which has to do with sexual assault in the Catholic Church. And so I think my brain was kind of clued in already to, institutions that are built in such a way that they could harbor and possibly enable abusers for so long and affect so many people. And so I was kind of considering what would motivate the USA Gymnastics to keep it secret. Was it similar to the motivations of the Catholic Church? Were their strategies the same? I wanted to kind of investigate it because I had already, seen the overlap with the Me Too movement. When Hollywood, those stories were coming out, I saw the similarities with the Catholic Church, and I found that to be disturbing and fascinating. And so I wanted to investigate it further. But then directly following the Nasser story were the Winter Olympics of 2018. So I think, you know, it was on everybody's mind when we were watching these Olympics, you know, all of the things that the athletes had gone through that we hadn't really considered before. And in a way, I was kind of felt complicit myself to, like, you know, enjoy these athletes and watch what they could do, the miracles that they could perform, without ever really considering what their lives were like and what sacrifices they had made. You know, we watch these like kind of cleaned up biopics before they go onto the floor, and we're so inspired by them. And we think maybe we know them and have a little taste of who their families are. But of course, we have no idea what they've been through. So I guess I was drawn to this material and started researching and kind of fleshing out these characters as a way to pay attention and to look more closely and consider all of these questions. Like, you know, Gabby Douglas moved across the country to live with a family in Iowa. Like, what kind of sacrifice is that like? You know, what other things have athletes done? How does it affect the marriage if the parents don't agree? How does it affect the other siblings when you have all of the resources of a family funneled to one child in particular, and then the other might be neglected? And what are the costs to your body and to your mental health and to your emotional well-being, and all of these questions that, aside from, you know, the sexual assault case, I thought, you know, were pretty compelling and hadn't really been considered. At least I hadn't considered them.
You know, I don't think most people consider them. We have this American myth of exceptionalism, that there's the way to live your life is to be the best. And I think this book does a great job of unpacking some of those myths and some of those costs. Was there anything that really surprised you? I mean, you went in with, you know, quite a bit of knowledge, as you said, about patterns that go on psychologically to cover up sexual abuse. Was there anything that surprised you about gymnastics or the abuse as you got into the research?
There were things in both areas that surprised me. So for gymnastics in general, I think I was surprised by the idea that 100% of elite athletes are injured. It's an inevitability. You can't avoid, like, it's such a strain on your body that at some point you're going to push yourself too hard and something's going to snap and you're going to have to recover. And so just kind of like that physical toll and like the discomfort that they feel every day something hurts, and they live with that. And they're children, like, you know, they're very young, you know, like whether it's, you know, blisters or burns from, you know, from the bar, and, you know, there's something called crotch beam, where if you miss the, you know, the beam is only inches wide, and if you miss it and you axe it, you know, between your legs, like that impact, the hammering there, and, you know, of course, just like broken bones and ligaments and all this stuff, and then like the long-term effects that strain has on your body. So if you're you know, popping Advil every day, like that's going to affect your organs down the line. If you are like pushing yourself so hard that you don't experience menstruation as a teenager, that affects the estrogen levels that are released into your body and your bone density down the line. So you're more likely to have osteoporosis, arthritis, because your joints have been abused. So just like the things that, you know, that the cost that they are accepting at that age, and like what they'll have to live with. And, you know, the question of, is it worth it, especially if they don't achieve their dream, because there's only 5 spots and now there's only 4 spots actually. So yeah, like you can come so close and take on all of these costs and pay them and not, you know, miss it by a hair. So yes, that was something that surprised me about the sport in general, about the assault, and how the organization was kind of complicit, and how that structure kind of lent itself to harboring an abuser. There were some really disturbing details, like the training camp that all of the athletes had to attend was so isolated. It was on this big campus in Texas that was like an hour from any grocery store or hotel or gas station. And so it was just this like enclosed space for the gymnasts. There wasn't access to telephones. They didn't have internet connection. They couldn't contact their parents. So it was just kind of like cutting them off from any possible help. And in fact, I found a memo that one parent had posted in a gymnastics forum of directions to the athletes that if they had a problem in the middle of the night, that they should contact the doctor rather than their personal coaches. So like they were just kind of being funneled to this doctor, and for a particular reason, because this was a doctor who would give the okay to have them return to training, even if their bodies weren't ready for it. So, you know, he was an asset to the organization because he got the girls back on the floor, even if they shouldn't be there. So that's why they were motivated to keep him around, even if he had been accused of unspeakable things. So yeah, there was a lot to be learned.
I found both of those things among the most compelling aspects of the book. It had never dawned on me how much pain these athletes are in. I'm in pain from swimming too many laps, you know, but you think it's you. You don't consider that scene where she falls on the beam. Ouch. It's really visceral. And then in terms of the doctor, you know, I think we also have an idea in American culture that there's evil. He was evil, Larry Nassar, but it took a whole organization to allow him to exist. And the idea that they kept him around for a reason, I thought that was so powerful in the book. And, you know, I don't think I'm giving away any spoilers because people know the story of Larry Nassar.
It's questions that everyone has had to ask. Why, like, there were accusations, so why was he in place? And it's this motivation, you know, that they need the girls to be returned. Like, he was considered the best doctor, so he treated, you know, in the way that he treated, but also in the way that he kept the girls performing.
Right. And I think that's the missing piece that you don't see in the media. You just think, oh, well, they didn't speak up enough, or people didn't want to see it, which is part of it. But there was a real economic reason for having him there, because a lot of money gets invested in these girls.
Right.
You know, I want to talk some more about ambition and exceptionalism. And I think you say it really well in the book. So for everyone out there, I think it's fun to hear the author read her own words. So on page 172, there is a passage from the point of view of Charlene Wheeler. Am I saying her name right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And she's the mother. She's the mother of the gymnast, and that she was a phenomenal character. And the second paragraph, the first full paragraph in 20 years, I think that's a powerful piece.
Sure. So this is a spot where Charlene is, Sera has missed an opportunity. Like, she was, so it doesn't look like her future in gymnastics is going to be able to progress. So this is her kind of lamenting that idea. In 20 years, when Sera is at someone's backyard cookout and her belly is paunchy from carrying babies and her boobs, excuse my French, are hanging down to her collapsed belly button, nobody will give a hoot that she almost made the Olympics once, because almost doesn't count for anything. Her poster won't be taped to anybody's walls. Strangers won't recognize her name. She'll eat a hot dog and a slice of sugar cream pie in the company of housewives and math teachers and traffic cops. Normal people, just like her and me.
And I want to ask you about that and me.
Oh, yeah.
And it's very much Charlene's story also, because you can't be a 12-year-old elite athlete without the support of your parents. So, you know, there are two different generations. You'd like to think there's more opportunities for Charlene as a woman who experienced the first two waves of feminism, but how do you think that she was motivated by the gymnastics and her daughter? Are they the same? Are they different?
I think Charlene is raising Sera in response to how she was raised, in a way. So she felt like she was always underestimated, that her parents didn't expect much of her, that they didn't, support her or push her or believe in her to be anybody other than, a housewife at some point. So when Sera shows ability, Charlene kind of clings to that. And of course, Charlene, wants to do it vicariously. She wants to be somebody because she never got to be somebody, and maybe her daughter can. But she also is just responding to the way that her parents neglected her. So she puts everything into Sera's dream and pushes her and supports her and believes in her and helps her in all things at all costs. Sera is, doesn't have anything to respond to. But I mean, she's naturally ambitious. She does want to perform and outdo herself and make her parents proud. And then at some point, after a few years of being in the sport, she has to kind of make their investments worthwhile. She feels that pressure very strongly. So she feels like she's beholden to her investments and all of the money her parents have put into it and all the time and all of their fights and conflicts. She has to make that worthwhile. So yeah, they're both kind of reacting to their own parents in a way.
Yeah, I enjoyed that idea. This idea of all or nothing, she had opportunities not to continue pursuing the Olympic dream, but the message was very much, if you do anything but the Olympics, it's not good enough.
That's right.
And that, do you think women are pushed more? Is it women and men? I mean, I find it so pervasive in my life that, if you don't run a marathon and you do a triathlon and it's not long enough, that doesn't count,
Right. Yeah, I feel like women have fewer opportunities to be considered exceptional or to be supported in pursuit of the exceptional. So when there is that opportunity, I think the stakes are higher, particularly with women's gymnastics, because it is one of the only sports where the female division is lauded over the men's division. So there's so much pressure there. To be celebrated, in a way that no other woman is celebrated, and like it's kind of an incredible opportunity to have all eyes of the world on you in a way that no other woman gets in an athletic performance.
It's so true. I can't think of another sport.
Yeah.
Maybe watching Serena play tennis.
Maybe, yeah.
But only her.
Right.
I don't have young girls. I have teenage sons. But one of the things that I find so interesting is after 3 waves, or is it 4 waves of feminism, the girls are being even more sexualized, it seems, by social media. Did you feel like the pressure is amping up on the girls in your research, or that after the Nassar, maybe people are revising their ideas about what's normal for young girls?
I think there certainly is a reaction after the Nassar story. I mean, that was just huge. And the bravery of those athletes to come forward and to continue working against, similar experiences and against their own organizations. I mean, Simone Biles is, like she said, one of the reasons she's sticking with the Olympics is so that there can be a survivor still inside that organization who's forcing people to pay attention. I mean, she's also just the greatest of all time and can do anything she wants, but she feels that obligation to remain there because there aren't that many left. But Allie Raceman is still a voice that is, being a social justice advocate and continuing to call for investigation inside the organization. But actually, I just saw an article yesterday, because you mentioned sexualization of the girls, of a German gymnast who is performing in like a full leotard, like long sleeves and long pants to kind of work against that leotard, the traditional cut. Because she thinks that leotard sexualizes women in a way that is unnecessary, and especially young women. But yeah, the social media is a very interesting force. It strikes me that it kind of enhances the competitive aspect of young girls because you have to be the best to or among the best to rise in this sport. And to be able to then, like that alone is a lot of pressure, but then to be able to look around and see your competition and to see what they're doing and what your peers in other states or in your own state, to be able to find that and watch it must just be a constant reminder of what else is out there and who else is out there.
Yeah. I read somewhere that in olden days, pre-internet, people were only exposed to between 30 and 100 people in their community that on a regular basis. So they didn't have, there maybe were a few exceptional people and, it was a normal bell curve. But on social media, of course, you can just look at all the people at the top of the curve and think, why aren't I there?
Right.
It's painful.
Yeah.
we touched on this a little bit, but the whole idea of denial of the body, and the girls starving themselves so that they don't get their period. I found that shocking. And yet, of course, you know, it had never dawned on me, but of course, once they hit puberty, they're not going to be able to move like that. Because of this denial of the body, they don't really believe the abuse. And so, well,
because of their discomfort and like what they're used to feeling all the time, they're able to like just take this, experience the abuse and explain it away to themselves as it's just another discomfort that I have to endure. It's something else that I don't have to speak about and make noise about, right? Because I'm not supposed to complain. You know, like I can't let everyone know that I'm like, this is just another thing I have to suffer.
But I can't let everyone know I'm sexual. I thought that was interesting because the mother in the book sees it as a sexual, the girl who's complaining about it is somehow flaunting her sexuality. Was that something you uncovered? Was that a connection you made on your own? I thought that was chilling.
Yeah, so that was from the mother's point of view when her daughter passes on an allegation to her mother, and that's how her mother responds, is saying that, oh, your friend is just trying to get attention in this way. And I think, so I was exploring Charlene's justifications, like if because I was wondering how many parents there were that must have heard things or heard these accusations and didn't say anything because they were so motivated to keep their child safe inside the organization, safe in the way of continuing to pursue the sport. Because one of the problems is that USA Gymnastics is not quantitative in how they select team members. So it's on their whims. There's a selection committee that just says, okay, you, and it's not based on numbers. So there doesn't need to be evidence as to why they chose somebody. So you really have to stay in their good favor. So everybody knows that that's why some of the athletes, you know, they stay in line, and the parents know that, like their daughters need to stay in line. So I think Charlene, when she heard this accusation, needs to come up with some way to convince herself that it can't be true, because she doesn't want to speak that, she doesn't want to share it. She needs to keep it to herself so that her daughter can have success in a future in the organization. And I think in general, when we hear something that horrifying, our instinct is not to believe it, because we don't want to believe that such terror can exist. So it's more comforting to tell ourselves that maybe this girl is confused or just wanting attention or struggling in her own way, than to believe that there can be this doctor who everyone proclaims to be the best, the absolute best in the world, to be a nice guy, to be so supportive, to be lauded in all ways, could actually be a monster. So I think our brains would do almost anything to help us live with an alternative than that truth.
But there's also an element of shaming that I think has gone on for generations with women, which is one woman shaming another as though her sexuality made her too much, too ugly. And the mother sort of buys into that, you know, that it's not just denial, it's that the girl, the very idea of any sexual abuse, she doesn't hear abuse, she hears sexuality, and the girl must be put down.
She references like an experience that she had with teenage girls when she was young too. So yeah, you're right that there is this just like complicated relationship with women against women sometimes, where it comes from shame, a little bit of maybe self-hate, and yeah, like how we could lash out at each other.
And that our bodies, you know, are sort of subject to other people's gaze all the time. There's a passage I would love you to read. It's on page 66. And this is getting, again, I found the mother just as fascinating as Sera. To put it in context, at the bottom of the page, the mother is trying to get the father to agree to let Sera do something. And the daughter is observing how the mother gets her way. Do you want to give it any other context?
No, that sounds good. Do you want me to start with my mother popped the fry? Is that...
Yeah, but yeah.
Okay. My mother popped the fry in her mouth. As she chewed, I caught an uptick at the corners of her mouth and realized all at once that she never wanted to move to Texas. That was the thing that she was trying to get the father to agree to. She offered it as an extreme so they could compromise on something he wouldn't have settled for had she used it as her starting point. She'd conned him. Being a Midwestern woman, an identity in which language is a dance, she'd already had a foundation for such maneuvering. So I didn't know if she'd been conniving all along, or if while I worked on aerials and arabesques, this was the skill she'd been honing.
I think the next paragraph too is part of it.
Perhaps this was part of the reason I was attracted to gymnastics, where people were scored to the 10th of a point for content, difficulty, execution, and artistry. When you made errors, you received deductions. You knew when the people around you were good, when they were bad, and by how much. You didn't have to interpret tone, timbre, and the space between words. You knew where you stood, and you knew how you could be better if being better was what you wanted. In real life, there were no points to tally, there were no ranks, there were only guesses. Make enough guesses and you were bound to be wrong some of the time. Your mother, who you thought loved your father, could trick him. Your father, who you thought was smart, could fall for it. And a doctor who you thought was good could be the most dangerous person in your life.
You know, I love that passage. I loved how you read it. And this idea of perfection is pervasive. And this idea that the girl is so young that she is being given all of these mixed messages. I just would love you to comment on that phenomena, what you felt when you wrote it.
Yeah, so I think that passage touches on like the female expectation to be nice and to smile and to not say directly what you want, but to be the good girl, and how that kind of fits into the culture of gymnastics, in that it's a performance in a way, and that you need, and like the expectation to be obedient, and that's part of the reason I think why I decided to set it in the Midwest. It's in Indiana. I mean, first of all, Indiana is where the headquarters of USA Gymnastics was, so I felt like maybe it should be at like close to the heart. But also I found it interesting that a lot of people consider that language and that communication style of the Midwest to be that, like you called the language of gymnastics, of, you know, having this subtext, this current running beneath it, but performing and presenting it in a different way. So like how you package something. So there is like kind of this like overlap between Midwestern dialect, as well as culture of gymnastics and expectations of women on how you need to present yourself. And it's all this, like, you have to balance all that. It's like juggling act.
Right. And unrealistic, because life is messier. And in a way, Sera can get rid of the mess of growing up by just focusing in this very narrow field where it's good or bad.
And it's dangerous, because if you have all these girls who are learning that they can't say what they should, like what they're thinking, that they need to kind of dance around it if they're going to communicate it at all, then none of them are going to be heard.
Correct. Yeah. It's fantastic part of the book. The other thing is the depiction of Eddie Levitt, the doctor, who's clearly based on Larry Nassar. The fact that he's so benign makes him so much more chilling.
Yes.
How much of that was based on fact?
That is totally taken from firsthand accounts. So I listened to a lot of podcasts and documentaries and read a lot of articles. So that was how he was able to get away with so much of his despicable behavior, because he convinced the girls that he was somebody they could trust. So he was a force. He was a character at the ranch who was a foil to kind of the militaristic training of the coaches. Like, they were harsh, they were verbally abusive, they withheld food from them. They were, you know, they were tough. And he was this kind foil who snuck them treats at night, encouraged them, gave them gifts. He was the nice guy. And so they turned to him for support and for comfort. And they trusted him and were drawn to him. And so when he did things that were unthinkable, they also couldn't believe that that was true. But he's such a nice guy, you know, gymnasts first is his motto. So they were able to talk themselves out of thinking what he's doing is wrong, because he presented himself as somebody who was so trustworthy.
Yeah, that's scary. You know, as a fiction writer myself, I found that I was curious as I was reading this, why fiction? I mean, I have my own views about the power of narrative, but there has been a book written about this in nonfiction. What were you hoping to accomplish by creating a fictional tale?
That's a really good question, and one that I've asked myself a lot. I think there's a few benefits to fiction. One is it provides space for the reader that might be a little more comfortable. If you can tell yourself, okay, this is not like a true story. There's a margin there where we might not feel so exposed ourselves as readers, and be able to approach the material with a little bit more comfort in mind. Second, having that creative narrative license allows me to package it in a story that has a strong arc, that might attract readers that wouldn't go to nonfiction. So like there's that plot, kind of
engine
aspect. Yes, the engine. Thank you.
Yeah.
Third, I don't have to answer to a court of law, and I don't have to, if I'm saying this is nonfiction, I have to really stick with things that have been proven and have the burden of proof. But when I'm saying it's fiction, I can hear somebody's firsthand account and believe them and incorporate that into the story without having to have two backup witnesses, so, and in that way, like fiction almost can capture the spirit of the truth more than nonfiction can, or in a different way.
Yeah.
That I can just, hear everything and then choose to incorporate it without having then the burden of proof. Thirdly, there were, some other aspects, of gymnastics that I wanted to explore aside from sexual assault, that this allowed me to explore as well. If it was just an account of sexual assault, I would have to kind of stick to that. So I was able to, have more freedom in the themes that I explore, and take a few different accounts and combine them, or a few different characters and combine them. This doesn't have the John, it doesn't have like a John Geddert character, but there's aspects of him in different coaches. So I'm able to compile in ways that nonfiction wouldn't allow me to.
I thought the storytelling was magnificent. I was really on the edge of my seat and surprised at many, many events in the book, but not surprised that they were unlikely. Just, it kept me gripped. The athleticism, I'm not a great athlete, but I like reading about athletes and hearing about their feats. And you did a great job of that in the book.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for reading and being here and for those awesome questions.
Yeah, I loved it. Do we have time for one more? I can't see the time.
No. So I'm just popping on because we have a couple of questions from the audience, but we might have time for one more after, because there are two questions that are basically about research. First, from Susanna, were you able to interview any gymnasts or survivors while researching the book? If so, how did their words influence your writing? And if not, what resources did you turn to? And then the second question is related, which is just to talk about the research that you conducted.
Sure, yeah. So for general research, I read a lot of memoirs of gymnasts. There's a lot out there. Some are more kind of inspirational, YA, but some are more kind of gritty, and coming forward to reveal some of this stuff. So, both of those were helpful. There were a bunch of like Larry Nassar podcasts, which interviewed girls firsthand. So I didn't approach any myself, but there was so much. So many women came forward. And so there were so many accounts that I could hear firsthand without reaching out to them myself and feeling like I was, invading their privacy. So yes, those podcasts, there was like hours worth of it, which were very difficult to sit through, but really important. There were a few documentaries this year, and about the Larry Nassar scandal, Athlete A, for instance. And then for general research, because I'm not a gymnast, I spent a lot of time watching competitions, and like in slow motion. There's a feature on YouTube where you can slow it down to like a quarter, and so I could just see like how the movement looks, because I've never done it myself. And then I would like, I don't even know what the movements are called. So I'd have to like go to the comments and see like, oh, at 235, that was a really cool, triple twist. And I'm like, okay, triple twist. And then like, then I'd go YouTube, how to do a triple twist. So I could see like instructions for how you're supposed to propel and like what your rotation should be like. So I could actually write, how the athlete would do it. And then I, worked with an authenticity reader. Blythe Lawrence is the co-author of Allie Raceman's memoir. So after I was for 2 versions, she read it over and helped me with accuracy for like the technical stuff with gymnastics and the general spirit, just to make sure that I was landing in the right spot.
Pun intended.
Yeah, exactly. I stick the landing. Yeah.
Right. Nice job. That's so funny that in this last year, we've all gone to YouTube so much to be like, how do I wash my clothes in the sink? How do I do this? How do I do a triple twist?
Right.
But Joanne, those were the questions from our readers. So if you have another, that would be great.
Well, this is a tough question, but are you working on anything new?
Yeah, so I have the memoir coming out in the fall, which is already available for pre-order if anyone's interested. It's called My Body is a Big Fat Temple. And it's, I wrote it because when I do any experience, I like to, find material on it so I could write about it and kind of figure out what to expect and what other people went through. And I just didn't find a lot of narrative stuff about pregnancy and those early stages of motherhood. There was like more how-to or like the science of pregnancy, which I read and appreciated. But I wanted to compile more of like an army of women, because the experiences are so different. So you really have to read a lot to find someone that you recognize or parts that you recognize. Also, I felt that the journey was like, had been kind of romanticized by like the general culture and idealized. And so if you're feeling like anxious or, like if you see something gritty, and it's a very primal thing. And I felt kind of caught off guard, and that I hadn't heard about it. So I wanted to, be straightforward and honest and have no conversational gymnastics and just,
Right.
And just speak the truth. So I wrote this memoir so that future women could have, something that they recognize and not feel like an anomaly with the pregnancy and those days afterward. I had a little bit of postpartum depression, and, and so just like what that feels like and how common it is, and like all of the side effects of pregnancy that are so common that people just don't really talk about. So that is coming out in the fall. And then I have another novel coming out in 2022 about a woman Air Force service pilot and her daughter, and how like the inheritance of regret, like the women Air Force service pilots were during World War II. They were the first women to fly domestic airlines, or to fly military airlines. They did all the domestic duties. And then after the war, they were just dismissed and, had to return to their houses, and what that felt like to be unacknowledged and kind of forgotten, and how you would pass that on to your daughter.
Did you read The Women with Silver Wings by Kate Landau?
Yes, I did. Yeah.
She was at the festival last year, which is
oh wow, cool.
Asking. She was really great.
Yeah, I'll have to look up that interview.
There's one more reader question about what you are reading now.
I just finished Valentine by Elizabeth Wentworth, which was a really great book. I basically listen to all my books now because, I'm just like either I'm watching my son or I'm writing, and then so it's great to be able to still consume books in some way. And it was performed by different narrators because they have like the different first person accounts, and it's the setting was so visceral in this like dusty Texas town, and it also dealt with sexual assault, which is a theme that I've been writing about, and just like how an incident could affect the community, and the women's reaction to it. What are you reading, Joanne?
I just finished a very charming book called Good Eggs by a woman named Rebecca Hardiman. And it's about a family in Ireland. And it's sort of a great read for COVID because it's great writing and a great story, but it's funny. This is like, it's like a wacky grandmother and a troubled teenager and a stay-at-home father. And it had just, I could see it, I could see your book being a movie and I could see this book being a movie.
Yeah, it's being, so Happiest Girl is being shopped currently. So hopefully there'll be some bites. Yeah. And what are you reading, Leslie?
I'm a little embarrassed to say that I've spent this entire pandemic almost exclusively listening to Agatha Christie books over and over again.
Oh.
That is not embarrassing at all. That's
not at all.
I've listened to them. So they're so great. They're read. I don't know if you ever watched the Poirot on BBC, but they're read. A lot of them are read by Hugh Fraser, who plays Hastings. And I've just found extreme comfort in listening to these stories over and over again. But I'm also listening. I've been listening a lot to books too, because I am a professional writer. And by the end, I'm just like, I can't really read anymore. But I'm listening to Lily King's, it's Writers and Lovers.
She's up next, isn't she, at the festival?
I think she might have been yesterday.
Oh, was she yesterday?
To be totally honest, I can't keep track of all the amazing events.
Well, she'll be available on YouTube for anyone who's interested.
Yeah.
That was one of the great books of the year, I thought.
Yeah.
Even, if you're not a writer.
Right. Yeah, she's so that was great. We do have a few more minutes. And so would you tell us a little bit about how your other book got picked up by Amy Schumer?
Sure. Yeah. So Mercy House was my debut novel, and it had been a 10-year journey since when I really started writing seriously and submitting seriously to when it came out. And there had been other books and other submissions, and and when I submitted to my agent in May with Mercy House, and May 2018, and by June, suddenly there was interest in Hollywood. We didn't even have a publishing deal officially yet, and so I was fielding phone calls from producers and things, and which is just so surreal after 8 years of nothing, or some things little picks here and there, like an essay that got published, or a really nice rejection from a big publishing house, and but next to nothing, and then so then they're like, oh, do you want to have a phone call with Amy Schumer? And it's just so absurd, but so validating, because you're never sure if what you have is good, actually, if you're getting, if you're not making headway. And then so to have somebody at that level believe in your work is wow, maybe I actually have something. So then we talked on the phone, and then she asked me to come to New York, and I did, of course, and we chatted, and it was lovely, and so that's been in development since then. So we're coming on 3 years that's been in development. It's a slow process. There's a lot of people involved. There's a studio and a network and producers and the screenwriter, and they all have to agree at every stage. When they're writing the pitch pages, everyone has to pass around the pitch pages and put in their comments, and then it has to be redone. And then, so there's so many different steps. So the last I heard, they've been really nice about keeping me in the loop, even though I'm not really involved in the process. Last I heard, the pilot has been written, and they are submitting it, or thinking about submitting it to get someone attached. So the star. So they're thinking about casting.
Oh, very cool. Very cool. Well, congratulations.
Thanks.
And I appreciate you both being here. This was a great conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.